We're going to start the artist talk very soon. I just want to give you a few notes on Viva and about myself and the team who works here. My name is Shadi, and I'm the director of Medias Res Gallery, also Viva Alliance. I want to begin by warmly welcoming everyone to the artist talk with Hangama Amiri, which is facilitated by our curator, Maryam Babaei, and extend our gratitude to the community for the reception of our very first exhibition at this space. Before we begin the talk, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. It is with deep respect that we recognize the indigenous peoples who have stewarded the lands for generations, and we express our gratitude for being able to work and create on this territory. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the BC government for the production of this artist talk, along with a series of other upcoming talks that accompany our Viva's visual arts projects, such as the exhibition titled Of Wounds and Songs at Two Rivers Gallery in Prince George, as well as the third annual Viva exhibition at the Roundhouse Community. Over the past while, Viva has been growing, expanding with new ideas and opportunities to support artistic exploration in our community, and Medias Res Gallery is a space born out of that growth. It is a venue for our visual arts and curatorial projects to unfold, and it feels incredibly special that our first exhibition in this space is a solo show by Hangama Amiri. For this reason, I want to thank Hangama and Cooper Cole Gallery in Toronto for helping make the process of bringing this show in Vancouver very smooth and seamless. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Maryam for her fantastic job curating the show and our team for bringing this together. To our participating audience, there will be a Q&A period at the end of the talk, and there will be opportunity for you to propose your questions. And for everybody on Zoom, please type your questions in the chat box, and we'll read them to Hangama and Maryam after the talk is over. And with that said, I'll pass the floor to Maryam and Hangama to share their insight about the exhibition. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Shadi Jun. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful long weekend Saturday afternoon. As Shadi said, my name is Maryam Babaei. I'm one of the curators here at Viva Alliance. Today, my first happy task is to introduce our brilliant artist, Hangama Amiri. And for that, if you'll forgive me, I'll need my eyes. Hi, Hangama. Hangama Amiri was raised in Kabul, Afghanistan until the age of 7. In 1996, when the Taliban seized power in Afghanistan, she and her family were forced to flee their homeland. They subsequently lived in Pakistan, Iran, and Tajikistan as refugees before settling in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 2005. Today, the internationally acclaimed artist is based in New Haven, Connecticut. She predominantly works with textiles to create images that explore ideas of home, memory, and identity as a function of shifting societal norms and geopolitical circumstances. The figurative tendency in her work stems from her interest in the power of representation and her desire to bring to light the unsung stories of Afghan women's daily lives, both inside Afghanistan and in the diaspora, and to highlight their ingenuity and resilience through times of upheaval and uncertainty. The series Henna Night 2, which is on view at Medias Res Gallery until May 2nd, consists of 8 intricate wall hangings, textile wall hangings, that collectively depict an Afghan Henna Night celebration, a pre-wedding ceremony where the bride's female family and friends gather to celebrate her transition into married life. Through the artist's diasporic and emphatically feminine lens, this scene of this traditional rite of passage becomes a venue for exploring the role of cultural rituals in forging a sense of community, building resilience, and shaping our notions of home, identity, and belonging. Amiri holds an MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University, Connecticut, and a BFA from NSCAD University, Nova Scotia. She was a Canadian Fulbright Scholar and postgraduate fellow at Yale University School of Arts and Sciences from 2015 to 2016. In 2023, Amiri was awarded the prestigious Kaisering Scholarship by the city of Goslar, Germany. We also learned 2 days ago that Hangama is among the brilliant artists longlisted for the 2025 Sobe Art Award, Canada's preeminent contemporary Canadian art award. And you know what this means? This means that the entire team at Viva is going to follow the selections like the Olympics this year. Amiri's list of national and international exhibitions is too long to cite here, but a few of the venues she has recently exhibited in includes Esker Foundation, Calgary, the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, Ridgefield, the Aldrich Museum, Toronto, Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, Kansas City, Mönchehaus Museum, Goslar, and the Sharjah Biennial of 15, the UAE. We are really thrilled that we were able to open Media Stress Gallery with this brilliant body of work by Hangama. And as many of you may know, she had planned to be here and to have this conversation with us in person. But due to policies that were beyond all of our control, at the very last minute, her travel plans had to be canceled and we pivoted to this format. Before we dive into talking about Henna Night 2, Hangama wanted to say a few words to address what happened because we think it's really pertinent to the topics that we're going to be discussing today. Hi, Hangama June. Thank you so much for being with us virtually. The floor is yours.
Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me in here. And thank you for the lovely introduction, Maryam John and Shadi John. It's really a great privilege to be among you guys and show my work. And unfortunately, I so wish to be there in front of you guys in presence. As you all know, the political, climate in the United States and the very unsettling situation that's happening in this administration, it allowed me to not move internationally for the moment. So, I talked with my lawyers and attorney in here in New Haven, and they suggested highly to stay put for now until things quiets down. So, to be honest, Maryam John, for the sake of my own art, for the sake of my own community and art and studio practice that I have built myself in here in the United States, it was just like a very huge risk to take for myself to leave behind this. And if I'm not allowed to come back to the home that I built as well. So it's been a very unsettling time, to be honest, this past months. And it's really uncertain because every day is different and we just don't know what's going to happen, for today and tomorrow. So there's a vast difference happening these days. But it's really interesting to have this show in distance, but also very sad to not be in present as well. But I'm hopefully one day we will all reunite in some other form, in some other platform one day, and to speak, with each other without any, suppressing our freedom of voice and freedom of speech and who we are as an artist, of individual as whole.
We can't wait. We can't wait to have you here. It's interesting because so much of your practice, so much of your work is dedicated to exploring how geopolitical circumstances and societal shifts impact the lives of everyday people, impact their mobility, impact their agency. And I think this development sort of helped highlight the universal resonance of your work and its urgency and its relevance to all of us despite its apparent cultural specificity, it's definitely, you touch on such universal concerns, and this event, this occurrence sort of highlighted that. Okay, so let's dig into the actual works. How about if I start by just asking you to give us a general overview of your inspiration for Henna Night 2 and how it contributes to your larger body of work that is centered on the everyday lives of women in Afghanistan and their struggles and their joys.
Of course. I guess I can start speaking about how my bodies of work sort of shifted from, beginning when when I finished my school at Yale in 2020. That was, beginning of the pandemic era. And since then, I've been really interested in focusing on women's mobility and women's, political participation in the public domain. So I was really interested to kind of experience the new voices and the new fragility that they were having in that society and bring it into my work, into my textile pieces. But unfortunately, as a diasporic artist witnessing the current political situation that just shifted in 2021, in August of 2021, that lens on women's bodies representation has been so suppressed since the August of 2021.
Yeah.
And for me, it was really vocal to shift my lens also to see how the interior spaces and kind of the private lives of Afghan women become this as a space for unity, a space of resiliency, a space of, the community building to hold on to each other in a sense. So for me, I got really interested to this simple nuances of everyday life of Afghan women inside the homes, inside the rooms. But it's not only seeing it from a very wider lens, but I'm really also interested in my own narrative and my own personal experience of growing up in Afghanistan, migrating to Pakistan, and from Pakistan to Dushanbe, Tajikistan. And the fact that I'm mentioning these things is really important because I grew up being, around women, being surrounded by women. And these were from my mom's friends, mom's close friends and relatives. This was also because in my personal history, my father was not present around us. So my mom kind of built this communal space for herself, and it allowed me to also share that space with her. So these experiences that I'm making and that I am bringing these experiences into my textile pieces are my personal narratives growing up in those diaspora communities. And one of them is Shabe Kheena. And the Shabe Kheena takes place, it's a celebration that Afghan people does a henna night. So people put henna on each other's hand before their big wedding day, which is, next week or whatsoever. So for me, it was interesting to, focus not only the political side of what's happening outside of the windows in those lives, but also what is happening inside the window. And, focusing on the themes of celebration, themes of hope, themes, the subject that is also for a majority of women or Afghan women, both in the Afghanistan or in the diaspora, that speaking about interior homes or private life is also very taboo. So just amalgamation of different factors, that's what the inspiration behind this body of work came to be. It's both personal, both political, but also social as well. I can go on more about this, but you can stop me anywhere.
No, I love what you said about interior spaces as being places of unity, of community, of creativity. I think what this exhibition sort of highlights is that duality of interior spaces, that duality of home, because they're also places of confinement, places of segregation and being shut out from the world. But what this exhibition shows is the creative, joyful ways in which women turn this into an opportunity to express themselves in ways that they can no longer express themselves in public, and to actually maintain and kind of reinvent their customs, build community around their customs. You talked a lot about small instances of rebellion, the nail polish, the makeup, the politics of beauty, the bright colors, the shiny fabrics. Tell us a little bit about that, because you say it way better than I do.
Of course, I think I can speak about also the portrayal and representation of Afghan women in general. Let's say, living in the Western countries for so long, the portrayal of Afghan women has been a type of an image, a type of an image that media feeds off to victimize women a lot in the Middle East. Majority of times, not majority of times, it's been like an ongoing political space for women, and how media wants to see women in that category. And for me, that really was like a bothersome as an artist being here. I was like, but I have been in Afghanistan and I've seen so much joy and happiness in those people, and that kind of nuances of everyday life was so vivid and was so beautiful to not represent it in my work, or to not make a space for them to speak faithfully, speak some form of truth or faithfulness in a way, right? So for me, bringing them back to my textiles, it kind of given that kinship in the contemporary sense, so I'm retelling their stories from a different point of view, from a different lens, which is very vulnerable in a sense too. So that, that's the one thing that I was focusing on as well too. How can I, as an artist, how can I build a space, and how can I make a space for these untold stories that we don't hear much, or that we don't see much in the art history or individual culture, right? And the other factor is like, yes, as you mentioned, the politics of beauty is very different, the way I experience and the way I lived in here as well. For me, I left Afghanistan with my siblings in 1996 when the first phase of Taliban happened. And during those times, women were really repressed from their basic rights. And those basic needs are rights such as being beautiful, wearing shiny fabrics, or listening to music, or painting their nails. These little things were kept being, suppressed from them, and as if women were not allowed to be all of those above. And I've seen that performed in my own moms, in my own aunts, that slowly they become hidden under a hijab, under a veil. And I didn't see them being, like celebrating that exhibitionism in their body. So something that it was shocking for me as a child to experience it. So these days, when I see in my work, I go against that as a form of like a quiet resistance, I call them. In a sense, if I'm choosing a shiny fabric, that goes back to that memory of like, these were the things that were, they were not allowed, and I wanted to use it. Or nail polish, as you could see, my nails are always red or green or purple. This is a very quiet
Form of resistance.
Exactly, form of resistance that I take joy personally, but also I'm still creating a space for these stories that were not told, but also how women felt back then. So for me, art gives me that platform to play around such ideas and such taboos and such restrictions that happen around women's body. And it will continue to be. It's a very beginning language that I'm also being introduced to. But it's great because as an artist, when you're an artist, you have so much privilege of materials and thinking and researching, but also really advocating for your own memories, or like childhood memories, or who you are as an artist. So it's a very vulnerable place to be as an artist, but also B, that you have this privilege of material as an artist that you could play around and bring them back into your work, however you form, or whatever forms of language you're playing with. And for me, it is textile, and textile is very strong material. It's something also that, it's a very, people call them, it's very woman works in the past, because women were involved in this form of material making, right? That was their form of, creativity as well. But people don't think that, you know, like crafting or embroidery was also their economic means for majority of women in those households. So for me, I also take fabric as a very strong material, as a weapon in a sense, to fight back these forms of language or these things that happen towards women, So it's back and forth.
Yeah, you touched on so many things about the role of what's available to women in fighting back and creating resistance in their craft, in their beauty, and all of that. And I have a ton of questions, but before I get into your physical process and talk a little bit about how you actually make these pieces, I wanted to ask, you touched on representing your memories and everything, but I still want to hear maybe a fulsome description of where exactly these images come from. So are they from your photographic archives? Are they strictly from memory? Are there the imaginings? Is it a composite of all of those things? Is by combining all of these sources, is that how you exercise your own creative agency?
That's a beautiful question. If I answer this and then I could talk about how I make these works.
Yes, please.
Put the audience into context. I feel like we are kind of like shooting off more, which is great. But we have such a little time. I think it's a beautiful question. For me, I use all of those about. It's a composite of different things that comes into a body of work, and what makes a body of work, let's say, right? So it's amalgamation of memories, it's amalgamation of my childhood experiences, also imagination that comes, but also understanding materials too that bring certain familiarity or like certain closeness to how I see or how I think about cultural materials in a sense too. So for me, in this body of work particularly, the majority of pieces are from the family archives that I used to. That it's interesting because when you migrate from countries to countries, as an immigrant body, you always tend to bring lightest thing, lighter object that doesn't have much weight. And one of the things that we kept carrying with us was the family album. So that's like an evidence of memories or past memories that we've kept, so that when we open these photographs, we will revisit back to those memories that we lived in Tajikistan or Pakistan or back in Afghanistan. So for me, like it's very beautiful to revisit those family archives or family photographs, and I started to translate them, whether through drawing or gouache painting or just textile work that I do. And I also love, bringing my imagination into my series of work. So especially in these bodies of work, majority of them are from my imagination of how I experienced that event. What does post-memory means in this term, right? Like the piece that you're sitting in front of, which is the portrait of groom. That one was based on my own experience of going to being a guest and invited in my neighborhood in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. And my mom took me to this Shabe Kheena Henna Night. And I saw the bride was celebrating with her friends and family friends around this photo, that the groom was not invisible, but the celebration and the ceremony was on time, was happening. And it was beautiful, it was joyful. We ate a lot of delicious qabli palau and Afghan food and you name it. And there's always dance and music follows after that. But everyone was dancing and laughing around this photograph. It's very abstract. It's very something that I never experienced as a young child, but then it became very common. And I've went to so many different homes and guest rooms with my mom, with my siblings, and we had a similar experience of other people marrying a photograph. So in here, when I mentioned diasporic experience, it's really interesting because we never have the platform to talk about such wedding ceremonies, right? Not all love story happens that two couple meets in same event and same time and happy ending. For a lot of immigrant family, one or the other is not visible because they don't have rights of citizenry or citizenship to be together, or the economy of being together or having a home and celebrating one, lives together. So in this case, the man was in Western countries seeking asylum, but they were marrying in Central Asia, which was Tajikistan at that time. But what was really interesting for me, because like I experienced that, but I didn't have the photo of it or any other evidence. But that's what happens, that's the beautiful part when imagination comes into place. And you could play around so much about that idea. So in this piece, I decided to make the portrait very central in the scene, as you could see behind you, and also decorated with all these colors that are so feminine. Maybe there's a lot of pink, a lot of yellows and reds and a little bit of green, and it's on this little table on top of this Afghan carpet. So even the decor aesthetic is very woman-made, right? This is something that women wanted to decorate this still life portrait. And then in the portrait, there's just a young man with a suit, blue suit with red with red tie. So these things, it also talks about that, the presence of the handman is not visible. There's more woman's hand decorating, constructing the space, and kind of, identifying what's happening. And for me, it also acts as a still life, So there's so much to do. I mean, think about. So that's just how I source my materials and how I source stories together in order to make
a story,
an exhibition, a story. And as you mentioned before, this question was how I make these things. I was a painter as an artist to begin. I worked with painting for a very long time until my grad studies at Yale. I became introduced to fabric and to textile and to fiber art. This was something because in my subject matter, I would draw a lot of specific cultural materials through medium of paint, but I still couldn't get the confidence in that medium. It was something that was so ready-made, and just pressing it onto canvas or mixing paint onto canvas. It just didn't really resonate with exactly what I wanted in my work to be, because it wasn't honest of who I was. Because painting again was a medium that was given to me in my practice. That was something was told to me that when you're an artist, you have to paint portraits, or you have to paint certain type of styles. But for me, it just never felt authentic. Like there was no authenticity within me in relation to paint. And I used to like paint a lot of, as I mentioned, like fabrics, the fabrics that I would remember how my mom used to wear, or my aunts, or the fabric store that I grew up in Afghanistan. And I would paint them through medium of acrylic paint or oil, but I still couldn't quite get that memory right within this medium. So I slowly started searching these fabrics instead of painting them. And that's how I started learning about the demography of these fabrics in my studio, where these fabrics were coming from, what sort of cultural or historical or economic values they had, and why they were so attractive to me. Like it was very seductive material. And that's how I become interested, gathering so much fabrics and patching them together in order to make an image. So the process is like a painting, but I kind of see it as fabric. And I use this technique called fabric applique. And this basically you draw on a paper and then you recut the shape and then you assemble it on fabric. And each fragment of fabric makes an image. It's very difficult to explain right now. I wish
you're doing famously.
more difficult. Yeah, but that's one factor. The other beautiful part that I learned about myself through this processes was that the geography of these fabrics coming together was also somehow that I felt who I was as an artist too, because I wasn't from one place. I was fragments of so many different cultures and languages and history. So it was very transient experience to even touch fabric and make work out of it and just have it very fragile, but also very strong, but at the same time, very resistant, and to really feel like who I was also as an artist and as a woman and as a human being, right? So there's so much to talk about there, but that's just the preliminary how I see materials.
You touched on two things that are both my questions, and I only have two questions before we open it to the floor for everybody to ask their questions. One of them is you talked about patching together these fragments that each come from somewhere and have their own identity. So in your work, there is this remarkable interplay between really liberal creative agency and fidelity to your subject matter, faithful representation, and between fragmentation and cohesion. So, and it all comes through your fragmented aesthetic. On the one hand, the playful way in which you, liberal way in which you bring, patch together these materials, layer pieces to get a desired effect, sort of reminds, as you touched on, highlights the fact that identity and memory to a large extent is a creative construct. They're patchworks of memory that is always open to revision, reimagination, evolution. And we can see that in your playfulness and the freedom with which you work. But at the same time, in that same fragmentation, there comes through an anxiety of vulnerability that I think speaks to the burden of faithful representation, the burden of actually representing your subject matter the way they are or the way they were. And there's a negotiation that happens. How do you negotiate with your subject matter? How do you balance your own creative agency, your own interpretation? For example, I don't know if we have her dressing table. So, you talk about how you obsessively layered together pieces and printed the fabric to get the duvet cover just the way it was in your mother's room, or how to get, you work with faces and you layer pieces to actually get an expression just right. So how do you balance that, your own imagination, your own search for your own hybrid identity, your own construction of your identity and your fidelity to your subject matter? Is it something organic? Is it something that you think about?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very tricky question as well, but also I think faithful representation is one way to say it, but also, just also being vulnerable to those specific memories that I had growing up and the reminiscences, let's say, of what was past and how they can relive in my present day. And specifically, this piece was a portrait of my mother in her dressing room or like dressing table. So you see a glimpse of her half bed, but also the makeup space that she was getting ready. So I think for me, it was also interested to since as I mentioned in my previous talk, in my previous conversation about how like domestic spaces or private spaces were kind of is taboo for majority of Afghan women or in my culture to talk about in public. So for me, it was a really beautiful lens to really look at women, how they can own their own space and own their own room. And that room becomes this kind of fearless space of, celebration and beauty and just being themselves, And that was one photo that I had seen through my family archive that my mom was posing in front of this mirror. But I took that photo and I do remember that. And it was really beautiful to just see her pose and reclaiming her own space. And this was something very new to me in my own work. So for me, I wanted to stay as honest as I could, but also add a little bit of imagination so that I could disrupt that reality or protect her identity or her ways of, or our stories in some ways too. And it's also, I always, when I work back with my family archives or a specific subject matter, as if it is a collaboration for me. I speak with them and I talk with them and I'm like, I'm interested to do your portrait, but a specific, this is piece, what do you think? And my mom always is happy when I talk with her about these subject matters too.
Amazing.
She's also interested to learn how I'm making work or how I am doing representation of women in my work too. But one thing, the other thing is really interesting because like fabric, when I translate photos or memories into fabric holds its own narrative. It stretches form in different shape and because it's very tactile. You don't have like a rigid control of this material. It can shape shift. It can, shift shape, I must say.
Yeah.
And in this piece specifically, I was also interested to, I don't know if it will relate to the question you're bringing, but going back to this ideas of imagination, I also play around with popular culture or the things or the items or visual culture that she was surrounded or this subject is surrounded or was surrounded. Because if you see in the mirror, I tucked these small photograph of families, let's say, or Bollywood postcards. So for me, when I inject these sort of materials, there's also a space of imagination for my characters to escape to. It's a space of fantastical space, I call them. It's something that maybe the home is, private, but everyone has this imaginary of like living or what love is. But in this case, as I mentioned also in the beginning, my dad was not around us. So, if you could see, I was thinking about like my father not being around us and my mom imagining to have that complete ideal image. So that's why I would inject like Bollywood postcards, and it's a cinema that is very romantic. A lot of time, like all of their movies are very much about love and despair and grief.
Yeah.
For me, it was really interesting to also play with popular cultural materials so that it could contextualize my characters or my subjects. It's also something, a form of retelling a story in my work. So that if she visits this work, when she visits this work specifically, she was like, oh my God, I've seen that movie, or I've used this lipstick, or I've been in this room. So that's kind of like you're inviting a new ways of language making in the generations, like I'm inviting my mom to also be part of this contemporary art world, which is also fabric, which is also very new to so many of us these days too. So
yeah, and communal memory. We have visitors who come and read, like recognize things, remember things that resonates with them. It's sort of a form of community building. These are sort of shared memories to some extent, and you incorporate all the pop culture things that's familiar to all of us. So it actually, I think, generates belonging. You generate community the way the people you celebrate in your works do as well. I have a question about how sort of the way you subtly touch displacement in these works, because you have bodies of work that, and this is my last question, bodies of work that, I want to see Hangama large, guys. I don't see her. Thank you. That directly deal with displacement. For example, in your Rumi exhibition, you depict lost objects that have been left behind when their owners were displaced. Or in Reminiscences, you center the series on letters that your mom and dad exchanged between Scandinavia and Central Asia. So there is definitely a geographic grounding. There is a direct dealing with displacement. Here, you touch on that with the photo of a groom, but for the most part, it's how geographically ambiguous it is. We can't tell where this Henna Night celebration is Is it in the diaspora? Is it in Afghanistan? There's this precariousness, temporariness. We can't see behind the windows. There are curtains everywhere. So was this deliberate? Like this subtle hints at displacement, this subtle hints at in-betweenness. How did you look at this? How did you come about this?
That's really beautiful. I think for me, when you mention migration or migration displacement, it's a very universal language. I feel like every one of us have experienced it to an extent or to a form, right? And for me, I kind of I take it as a very vital role in my work to play around, because I've always also sensed myself to be in this in-between space, neither from here or there, but I'm also engaged with two different worlds at the same time. And that being said is like how hybridity plays in my work and my choice of materials and in my choice of thinking as well. Because even in this exhibition, I'm sure you guys will see the works up close, not my face in the screen so much, I apologize. In the work, for example, which is in a singular wall, which is called the Shirin Khori, which is the Shabe Kheena as well, in a sense. And on that table, you know, you see fabrics that are denim, fabrics that came from South Asian culture, or South Asian countries, sorry. And there's also plastics that has Arabic text. There was an image before that you just opened. It's a group of women looking at gifts. Yes, this one. So you see, for me, hybridity really reflects how I join materials side by side and how that brings the culture of East and West side by side together. So if you really see our tables, when we eat, every food or every material comes from so many different geographies, right?
Yeah.
But the body is somewhere else. The body is policed. And, you know, these are immigrants. These are, you know, diaspora people that I've experienced and lived and ate and, you know, celebrated with. So it's interesting that how in the global and the post-global, objects moves faster than the human body. And in here, for me, it was really interesting to note that, to point that through my materials. And that's how I think about hybridity and body and migration too. How these materials comes together, but the bodies are very static, but the objects are in a move. We never know where that plastic will go to a different home. And that plastic has Arabic language. Inside it is a Chanel package, perfume package.
Samples.
There's a barrier between language, even that place too, that I'm really interested, because language is something that I also have had a very hard time to express myself as a human or as a woman even. So it just comes maybe sometime unintentionally, but also very intentionally as well. So I take a great pride in this sort of form making in my work, because, you know, being as an artist, that allows me, because that's my, you know, political voice to express myself as loud as I can through the choices of materials that I'm bringing, or specific materials, right? Yeah.
I can't tell you, when we opened this piece, everybody was huddled over that plastic bag. The fact that there is Arabic writing on the plastic bag, and that there are Chanel samples, perfume samples, lipstick samples. So it was this really interesting thing to see. It was a fascinating touch. Thanks for that really fulsome answer on that one. Okay, I have so many questions, you guys, but before we run out of time, I want to see if you guys have any questions, and also put Hangama on so that I can see her face, please.
Thank you.
So before I bug you with more questions, let's see what everybody else.
Hi, thank you so much for that lovely conversation. My question is, you talk about photography and how small the works are, but now here being in the space, they're quite large. Couple of questions. Is that reflective of your painting? Does that stem from there? Or also, are you taking up space and being representative of those interior private spaces and the spaces that women often occupy? Because I can't help but be put into the textile works themselves. So just a couple of reference points there, that would be lovely. Also, really nice to see you.
See, I can see, unfortunately. Hopefully, I'll have another video of the audience later. That was a very beautiful question. I think it's amalgamation of all of those that you just mentioned. It's the way I grew, the way I learned about art was a lot about historic painting and historic painting that were also painted by men, and there was this kind of grotesque way of representation and like painting large landscapes and taking up a space that way. And for me, when I become really attracted to fabric, and I was like, wow, fabric could stretch as far as these paintings. So I could have that grip, so that I could also bring my pieces, whatever institution spaces that I will have the opportunity to really expand them, these fabrics, to really create a space, to really immerse my viewers in those experiences that I am, trying to think. So there's two things. One is, yes, materially could also brings us to so many different experiences. If the work is very petite, then we will think about that, like petiteness of the work, the intimacy of that work. Then there's a certain spaces of care that goes. And if the space, if the gallery space institution has works that are really big and kind of ambiguous than us or bigger than us, that kind of overpowers the viewer, right? Or puts the viewer into the experience of the artist, what they are thinking. And for me, this notion of playfulness with the space comes from a theory by Michael Foucault. And this was an essay that I read a long time ago when I was a student. It's called The Other Spaces. And in that essay, he's talking about hegemonic experiences, but also heterotopia. Heterotopia is a space that you create a small world within a world. For example, when you are a museum and when you go to Egyptian section or Persian section, you kind of feel like you're in that space. So the objects that you see, it's being contextualized. It's been taken from its context and represented or redisplayed in a new space to create that experience for you, that you will feel that you're in Iran, or you will feel that you are in Egypt. So that space making is heterotopia. And I got really attracted to that. And even today, I think about that. Like, how can I also make these childhood memories a new world for the viewers to experience? Afghanistan or Goslar, or for in here, Shabe Kheena. Like, what does that mean, right? First of all, when you see, so there's one thing, right? Yes, I have resources of photography. Sometimes those specific photographs comes to my work, but sometimes those specific photographs being expanded into just imagination of a space making or world building, as I say. So for example, even in this space, as you guys are in, the walls are painted green. That kind of gives you a space of interiority, as if you're in someone's home or someone's experience, right? And the textiles, there are a lot of fabrics, and fabrics has a lot of, it's a very seductive material, right? It gives you some comfort already. It gives you a sense of home, a sense of touch, a sense of care. And also, if you could see in this exhibition, we also played around the chiffons. And the chiffons for me also acted, it was a conversation within the architecture. I've used chiffon in my works in the past, but in this body of work, it kept acting as a facade or as a facade to divide the space for the viewers, so that they could, so that they are inside this room or inside this architecture again, or in a private space, let's say. So again, everything is around that fabric, around that expansion of a small memory, and just having the privilege to just stretch it as far as I can. But it's all weaved around fabric. And basically I'm trying to weave my viewers to be under those thresholds, under those mesh screens, as I call. I hope I'm not abstracting the answer, but
she gives me a thumbs up. I got thumbs up. Yeah, actually the chiffons really do function to sort of recreate that sense of privacy, but also that sense of claustrophobia that maybe being confined in interior architecture and interior spaces sort of has. And thank you so much on touching on the chiffons. It was on my list. You guys, we have a few minutes, a couple of minutes left. Any other? So Bettina asked, when you learned about using textiles, was it a class developed to textile practices or just the option to use them? Fabulous work, thank you. And Bettina is also a fabric artist.
Oh, that's amazing.
A textile artist.
The question is if I used it for material choice, or if I used it because of what? Sorry.
Can you bring up the chat?
I can also read it. I think I saw a question here.
I think she's asking if there was a class for it, if you actually took if your education included, if your formal education included textile art.
It's a lot self-taught, using this material to make image. It was something that I just wanted to learn stitching. So I started stitching by hand when I got attracted to fabrics and finding these fabrics and putting them together in a very abstract form. That's what was my previous works were based on. But I just wanted to learn how to stitch them. And instead of gluing or stitching by hand, which was so laborious work to do, I still stitch by hand, but not gigantic pieces. So I learned how to sew in my studies at Yale, and I just got a very cheap Sanjar machine that cost like $70, and I was like, let's go, baby. And I just started to like patching these fabrics together, and that was so revelatory. And even the stitching became like a form of drawing and line making, and I got really into it, as if it becomes like my world of collage just like collided into this one piece, and I could bring any materials and keep stitching them, keep adding them, and keep making layers. So it was very self-taught experimentation, because it was also a 2 years program. It was very short, and I just wanted to make and learn as much as material this university offered for me. And they had so many resources of inkjet computer printers and sewing machines that I found in other department of robotics. And so I would just go all these places and trying to learn how to use material and how to make image. And this was one of them. But it was also, I got very lucky, because in my group cohorts, there were a lot of artists interested in fiber art and embroidery and sculpture and video art. So there were like a lot of interdisciplinary practices at the same time. So I definitely kind of were educated in that space too. And I was looking, and I was also trying to do new things. And then in my last semester, one of my prof who used to do loom weaving in her practice as an artist, so she figured to like, why not bring a fabric class? And this was for the first time in the history at Yale that they literally consider such class to exist. So as you could see, even in our institution, craft making, working with fabric, it's not as high art at all. So I think it's been a very new language, even in these institutions, even in these academic spaces. And for me, I just felt this like leverage and privilege to like, I feel like I had a sense of a space to make mistakes, and I will be allowed as a woman to do. It was something that, everyone wanted to be a painter, and this like hierarchy that was around us. But at the same time, when I kept starting making fabrics, I felt like I did not have place in the art world. I become very hopeless in my last years, but somehow there were a lot of other artists who were attracted to this material that kind of give me that, backbone support. So it's both self-taught, but also about being just open, being like surrounded by so many other artisans that work in similar methods or similar materials. So the community was very enriching for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Guys, does Bettina have a follow-up question? It's fantastic. Yeah, I forgot to mention that sewing and textiles has been a part of your life for all of your life. That you actually grew up in your uncle's tailor shop, and your mom also taught you to sew from a young age. And I feel like stories that you tell and topics as complex as what you explore sort of needs that hybridity of material that you employ, the language of painting and printmaking and the tactility and malleability of fabrics. I think it's sort of the work she does kind of demands that hybridity, which you employ so well.
Thank you so much.
Guys, we're 5 minutes over. But thank you so much. It was so lovely to see you virtually. I really can't wait for a time when you're in Vancouver and we can work together in person and see you in person here. I'm gonna jump over there and say hi to you again. But thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much to Hangama Amiri.
And likewise, thank you everyone for making time to sit in front of us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this.